Thank you all so much for that great conversation. So this is our final next few minutes where Dee Davis, who's been leading rural work for so long, you were my first mentor as I stepped into this space. You helped us start to figure out our learning journey. It's really great to have you joining Alonzo up here, who's our VP for Research, Evaluation, and Learning at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and to both give us some reflections and hopefully some inspiration for moving forward. Thank you.
A little conversation about some of our takeaways, but particularly I want to hear Dee's takeaway because he is so connected and so involved with all of these issues. Plus, he's been taking copious notes, so I want to hear that. So that will just be a 10-minute preamble to a chance for there to be 10 minutes of more reflection from the group, and then I will formally close off at this part of the session in the live stream, and then you'll go off and do some of the small group work after that. So, Dee, out of all those notes you're taking,
yeah.
what do you think is one of your first major reflections from this day of so much rich discussion?
So, the first thing I thought of when I was asked to do this was, oh no, I have to pay attention. So this is, so I had to take some notes. That's right. Well, I think essentially for me, and I think for most of us who live in rural areas, we're always kind of trying to figure out, well, what's a problem, what's an asset, what's an advantage. We're balancing these things. We don't want to be in denial, but we also know that you really can't build a way forward unless you're working with, understanding your assets and lifting them up. And so I thought there were some essential moments today, and there's I thought an essential question that Sarah asked was, what if all the stories about you were that you were backwards and ignorant and you needed to leave? What would that do to your spirit? Well, that is a pretty essential kind of question. And how do you move forward from there? I was just fortunate today. I got to sit beside Stephanie Tyree, and I remember coming into I'm from Kentucky. We generally think of ourselves as a little better than West Virginians. And if there wasn't so many Tudor's biscuit worlds, we would think of ourselves as a lot better. But what I would say is that I came in to watch her community work when she was working down in southern West Virginia, and there was a woman who had been trying to wrangle something out of a county official and was frustrated. And she said that the guy said to her, well, politicians are like the wind. We just blow with the wind. You've got to be the wind. Well, in a way, that was a path forward. It was some strength. And in a way, I think about that when we're looking at these polling data. What's the way forward? What's the positive takeaway from? We know we're poor. We know that in some ways that we've got deficits. But how do you begin to build on those assets? How do you recognize assets? And so that's what I did. I made a list of assets that I thought were worth hanging on to, and if you don't mind, I'll just read them.
Go for it.
Our stories, power, diversity. I love this thing, this learning our rights and getting dental care at the same time. I thought that was great. Humor, family, heritage. The mountains are our grandfathers. I want to be a mountain for somebody, that we aren't supplicants, that we have standing to negotiate, taking care of each other, entrepreneurial spirit, knowing how to make and put $5,000 in a bank account, working for each other's children, common purpose, healer of markets, knowing that penicillin works, connections in systems and connection in story. And then there were some real special takeaways for me just in that last segment in the last panel when these kind of four moments of counsel. Use your voice for good, pave a path, don't be blind to your challenge, and a step in the right direction. So those really made a difference to me today and made me feel like this was a good place to be in a good moment.
That's great. That's great. I was jotting down my little one-liners on my phone during all this, and I'll I'm going to start with one thing that from Sarah, when she essentially said, I'm going to paraphrase, what's the matter with the book, what's the matter with Kansas? And she talked about kind of that kind of marginalizing dialogue. Now, I talked to her about that because I'm from Wyandotte County, Kansas, which is the poorest county in Kansas. I didn't know that growing up. And there's something about these narratives that other people develop for you, and that narrative was just developed from a very wealthy county to the south of mine. It's really important that we are able to capture our narrative in a grounded way, in a real experiential way, our rural narrative. That's really important. And the other thing, and it came across a lot of the different panels. Economists would call it market externalities or market failures, but market logic just isn't working for marginalized populations. It makes it worse, and and the comment about Flint and rural communities have so much in common because of this lack of infrastructure. If we understand this sort of generalization of marginalization, power, the failure of traditional markets to deal with this, I think that's a really important thing when we think about what can unify a deeper understanding of the rural experience, but also the commonality of marginalization, lack of power, that creates similar problems in urban areas.
I think the same thing that we see in marginalized urban areas, we see in a lot of rural areas where if we're going to move forward, we have to find some common purpose. We have to find some way to work, and it may not be with easily recognizable assets or with approaches that other people have used. One of the other inspiring things I saw was on a computer over there, a sticker that said, "Stay humble." What's the matter with Kansas? Well, a lot of people make predictions about how the politics are going to go, or who's going to succeed and who's going to fail. I think Brian's point about Brookings was kind of like that too. People are very certain of who's going to make it and who's not, but we should be a little careful in making these projections because there are a lot of balls in the air, and we're not sure how they're going to fall.
That's really true. Another thing I wrote down and I came across was the importance of cultural capital, and I think that in the last panel, and I think many of the assets that have been talked about, and those of you who live in rural America know, those are things to build on, and are both our narrative and stories, but as a researcher, our research needs to lift up these assets. At the foundation, we're trying to reconceptualize and move from a disparity dialogue to an equity dialogue, from deficits to assets, so that our research reflects better the possibilities rather than just a kind of presenting a portrait of failure.
Yeah, I think so many times it's not that it's just that story, it's just a song, it's just a lesson we heard from our grandparents that find a way to shine a light.
I'm getting the transition to Q&A little sign right there. So why don't we, 10 minutes of just general reflections. What moved you? What did you hear today that you will carry with you? Anything that you would like to add to this, what we hope is an ongoing dialogue beyond just the next open session, but on to the work we hope we will do together with you all in the future.
Well, they gave me the mic, so I guess it's my turn, right? And I don't know really what is left to say, but a couple things that came really through to me. One was, we spent a lot of time talking about how important it was to be honest and to really listen and to respect the rural people. And I think that's so true. I also really appreciated the importance that was played on saying, while we're working with people in our communities, we need to think about building opportunities and changing systems. I think that was very, very true. I would, in a way, want to perhaps lift up a little bit more this idea that, in our effort to make sure that we're not promoting stereotypes, we sometimes forget the narrative that really our most marginalized people face every day. So, last week I was talking to a mom who had an 11-year-old boy, cancer, probably looking at 6 months in Pittsburgh in a hospital 3 hours away. So her worry and the dad's worry was, well, how are we going to do the logistics? Dad's talking about leaving his job, and they have 2 children at home, taking care of them. That's a 3-hour drive, and they're staying there. So that's a rural problem that they face. We look at a 30-year-old coming out of jail for DWI who will be 2 years before he gets a vehicle, right? And how does he get employment and get stabilized in that environment? So that's something, that's a narrative that we also have to communicate. And I sometimes also think that we can't underplay the importance of building capacity in our communities and leadership. Those two pieces are something that are really, really important, because we're so isolated in many cases where we have to rely on each other, and we have to look at the leadership and the capacity of our communities and then connect with each other to promote that.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes.
Sure. With Dino Beckett from Williamson, West Virginia. First of all, I'd like to thank Robert Wood Johnson for coming to West Virginia, but also focusing on rural communities. I think that's the growth of our nation is really going to come as we start to build ourselves up with rural communities. When you look at, there's so many things that were brought up, and you guys have reflected on that, but when you talk about asset mapping and research, I think those are the things that are obvious. They're in front of us, and we ignore those every day, but it's very important for us to be able to document the data that we have before us and be able to put that in place to make change. And when we have the successes, there's so many great stories that are to be inspired by, just listen to everyone today. But if we're not able to document that and to have that data available for other communities to learn from, I think that we're missing a big opportunity there as well. But it's great to see all the stuff that's going on.
Thank you. I think there's a question. Was there a hand up over there? Yes. Oh, okay. All right, you can manage.
Hi, I don't necessarily have a question. It's more just a quick concept that I've been thinking about and is really gelling as I see all of these individuals in the room, whether we're working in policy or we're working with health or capital. But in looking at rural America and America just in general, thinking in my own stance, I'm the 7th generation that my ancestors fought, died, starved for. To be able to stand here today. But that's not just myself. So when we look at everybody in this room, we are all the 7th generation of America, Americans, and we see how The economy has grown in ways that, possibly we didn't even imagine. But this point in time right now, I think, is really exciting in that if we look at America as a whole, and generally just society tends to look at Band-Aid fixes, crisis management, which, there's a lot of that to be done, but not really taking a long view. If we look at America, and this is even globally, which was somewhat mentioned earlier, for instance, look at climate change and how that's affecting our economies, how that's affecting our coastal cities. When we look at building up rural America, we are in a position now to make changes and decisions and build up infrastructures and structures that are going to affect 7 generations in the future. So that's really exciting. And rural economy, we're thinking about it now, but in 10, 20 years, all of America is going to be thinking about rural economies and communities. For instance, I just briefly alluded to global warming and climate change. The more we see these effects just within our coastal cities, the more populations are going to be moving inward because there's going to be nowhere to go. So looking at so many aspects of this, we really are the pioneers of a new future, and we're doing it all together, and we're doing it in measures in which we're including each other. We're including, obviously we're speaking about rural here, but we're diverse in race, we're diverse in socioeconomic status, but we all have one overarching measure, which is to make rural communities great, but to look at it just another way, and maybe we can all figure this out and gel what this narrative is together. We really are building the future of America. We know it first. America will find out somewhat after the fact. But I find that very exciting, and I just find it very exciting to see such a diversity in this room all working towards the same goal. And I really think if we had $1 billion equity fund, we could figure this stuff out right now in 3 days. But until that happens, it's just been a pleasure, and thank you very much.
And I want to build right off that and say that this was a day that we were reminded that rural people have in the past transformed their communities and transformed their economies. But this time it's going to be different for a lot of the reasons that I'm sorry, I forget your name. Okay, that was just stated. We talked a lot about power and systems, and we think about that for rural folks. How in the past have they leveraged power, and they've found ways. And I think it's been in the last probably generation or two, a lot of rural people have been marginalized, but they can look to the history and look to the tradition of finding power, both politically within the economy. And a lot of the resources and assets that are in rural are as important, or actually more important, in the face of climate change, I think, than they have been in the past. And that's one thing that that kind of sank deeper into my mind today. Another thing that really made an impression on me was the fact that one of the most influential entities, philanthropy in the country, brought together truly a stellar group of rural leaders. For a day, to convene, to look at data, to talk about communication and framing. And there's others that have been honing these fields longer than I have, but this kind of thing actually, and it's a consistent drumbeat that RWJF is showing in commitment to rural. That's just really impressive, and brings me some optimism, sharing that optimism that we found in that data from rural people. So that's what
Thank you. Well, I'm going to wrap up this formal part of the presentation. Dee, thank you for your reflections.
Thank Katrina, and the foundation. This was a great event.
Well, thank you, and thanks for just a wonderful, vital conversation. We are really blessed to have had all of you at this convening. We've learned a lot. As I said this morning, we came here as rural learners, far from rural experts, but I certainly know a lot more than I did when I started, given the wealth of experience and things that have been so generously shared. We will be following up with you all via email so that you'll know when this archive live stream is available. And you can see Katrina, who'll follow me here, for other details about what things are coming out. I'm not going to go through a list of all of the ways we hope you can connect with us going forward, but we do have a website that I would encourage you, if you haven't gone to look for opportunities for grant funding, leadership development, the kind of things we're writing, and indications of our ongoing work and commitment to learn more and contribute more to building rural health and well-being in the country. So, as I said in the opening, we are all in this together. Our fates and our health is intertwined as a nation, and we really need to understand more about what we can learn from rural America toward that quest for a culture of health. So with that, I want to thank you all who are here, say a goodbye to our live stream audience, and now goodbye live stream audience. Thank you for listening, and turn this over to Katrina. So thank you all.